A woman sits at her desk at 2 in the morning, the pale glow of a laptop cutting through a room built from sharp geometric shadows. Her presentation is tomorrow. It could change everything. She closes the laptop, picks up her phone, and scrolls through videos for the next 4 hours. She is not lazy. She is not stupid. In fact, she graduated top of her class. And that is precisely the problem. This is one of the strangest patterns in human psychology. The more capable you are, the more likely you are to build walls between yourself and your own success. Not because you fear failure, because you fear what success might reveal about you. In a laboratory in 1978, two psychologists named Stephen Berglas and Edward Jones designed an experiment that would expose a hidden flaw in the way smart people think. Participants sat in small rooms under fluorescent light and answered a series of difficult problems on paper. But here was the trick. Half of them received problems that were actually solvable. The other half received problems that were completely unsolvable. Impossible. No human could reason through them. Then something strange happened. The experimenters told everyone they had done well. Every single participant heard the same praise, regardless of whether their answers were right, wrong, or aimed at questions that had no answers at all. Now picture a long corridor with 2 doors at the end. Each door is labeled with a simple geometric symbol. Behind one door is a pill that improves cognitive performance. Behind the other is a pill that impairs it. Before taking a second round of tests, every participant had to choose. The people who had solved real problems, who understood exactly how they earned their success, walked to the door marked with the enhancing drug. They wanted every advantage. But the people who had been praised for solving unsolvable problems, the ones who had no idea why they succeeded, chose the impairing drug. They deliberately handicapped themselves before the next test. Let that settle for a moment. Given a choice between something that would help them think and something that would make them worse, they chose worse. On purpose. Berglas and Jones gave this pattern a name: self-handicapping. They defined it as any action or choice of performance setting that enhances the opportunity to externalize failure and internalize success. In plain language, it means building yourself an excuse before you even begin. If you fail, the excuse absorbs the blow. And if you somehow succeed despite the obstacle, you look even more impressive. Now zoom out from the laboratory and into a city at night. Apartment windows glow like a grid of small screens, each one containing a person preparing for something important. A job interview, a final exam, a difficult conversation. And in a surprising number of those windows, the preparation looks nothing like preparation. One person stays awake all night binge-watching a series. Another picks a fight with their partner the evening before a major deadline. A third drinks just enough to feel off the next morning. These are not random acts of poor discipline. They are strategies. Unconscious, destructive, but internally logical strategies. Berglas and Jones identified 2 distinct forms this takes. The first is behavioral self-handicapping. Real actions that genuinely reduce your chances. Not sleeping, drinking, procrastinating until the last possible hour. The second is claimed self-handicapping. Verbal shields. Telling everyone beforehand that you are stressed, exhausted, sick, overwhelmed. You do not actually reduce your ability, but you preload the narrative so that any failure already has an explanation waiting. Picture a courtroom made of angular, faceted shapes. The accused sits in the center. But this is not a trial about guilt. It is a trial about identity. The question being asked is not what did you do, but who are you really? Self-handicapping is the defense attorney. Its only job is to make sure the verdict never touches the core. And here is what makes this pattern so insidious. It works. In the short term, it genuinely protects self-esteem. The shield holds. You fail the exam, but you tell yourself you did not sleep, so the failure says nothing about your intelligence. You bomb the interview, but you were sick that morning, so it does not count. The core identity remains untouched behind its fortress of excuses. But the fortress has a cost. Imagine a bridge stretching across a dark canyon. Each plank is an excuse, a reason you gave for underperforming. The bridge looks stable from a distance, but every plank you add makes the real ground below harder to reach. You are walking further and further from your actual abilities, suspended over nothing. In 1998, researchers Zuckerman, Kiefer, and Nee followed people who scored high on self-handicapping tendencies and tracked what happened to their lives. The findings were bleak. Those who self-handicapped more frequently tended to have lower academic performance. They showed worse coping strategies under stress. Their overall psychological adjustment was poorer. The researchers were careful to note this was correlational, not causal. But the pattern was consistent and strong. The shield that protected the ego was corroding everything around it. If you recognize any of this in yourself, that recognition is not a flaw. It is the first crack in a pattern that depends on staying invisible. Now step into a different kind of space. A vast, open room where translucent geometric shapes float in the air, each one representing a personality trait. In 2002, researchers led by Ross examined how self-handicapping connects to the broader architecture of personality. They found that people who self-handicap more tend to score higher on neuroticism, that deep sensitivity to threat and negative emotion. And they tend to score lower on conscientiousness, that steady, disciplined follow-through. Again, these are correlations, but they sketch a portrait. The self-handicapper is often someone who feels things intensely and struggles to convert intention into sustained action. Not because they lack ability, because their emotional alarm system is tuned so high that it intercepts effort before it begins. Go back to that original experiment and look more carefully at the people who chose the impairing drug. What did they all have in common? They had been praised for something they could not explain. They succeeded, but they did not know how. Berglas and Jones saw this as the core engine. When success feels random, when you suspect your achievements came from luck or charm or circumstances beyond your control, every future test becomes a threat. Not a threat to your performance, a threat to the illusion. Now picture a child in a classroom made of simple colored blocks. The teacher holds up the child's painting and tells the class, "This child is gifted." Not "this child worked hard." Not "this child tried something interesting." Gifted. A label that sounds like a crown, but functions like a cage. Because now the child has an identity to protect, and the only safe way to protect it is to never fully try. If you never give your complete effort, failure can never be diagnostic. It can never tell you the truth. This is what Berglas and Jones uncovered at the root of self-handicapping. It is not about laziness or lack of motivation. It is about people who received approval and success regardless of actual effort. They were praised for talent, not for process. And because they never learned the connection between what they did and what they achieved, they could never be sure they could do it again. Walk through a hallway lined with mirrors. In each mirror, a different version of you appears. One is the version your parents described. One is the version your teacher praised. One is the version your colleagues assume. And somewhere at the very end, barely visible, is the version that actually did the work. Self-handicapping keeps you from ever reaching that last mirror. There is also a dimension to this that researchers did not expect. In 2007, Alter and Fortis discovered that your mood at the moment of decision plays a powerful role. They found that people in a positive mood were significantly more likely to self-handicap. 68% of participants in a good mood chose to handicap themselves, compared to 48% in a neutral mood and 44% in a negative mood. This seems backward. Why would feeling good make you sabotage yourself? Picture a person standing on top of a tall, glowing, geometric tower. The view is beautiful, the air is warm, and the only direction from here is down. When you feel good, you have more to lose. Self-handicapping becomes a way to protect that elevated state. You build a cushion beneath the tower so that if you fall, the landing is softer. But in building that cushion, you often cause the very fall you feared. There is one more layer worth examining. In 2003, Hurt, McRae, and Boris discovered a consistent gender difference in how self-handicapping manifests. Men were more likely to engage in behavioral self-handicapping, the real, tangible acts of sabotage, staying out late, skipping preparation, choosing the impairing drug. Women were more likely to engage in claimed self-handicapping, the verbal preloading of excuses, mentioning stress, emphasizing illness, announcing how little time they had. The researchers suggested that social expectations shape which form of self-protection feels available. But in both cases, the underlying engine is the same: protect the identity at any cost. Now zoom far out. See a landscape made of low, angular mountains under a pale sky. Across this landscape, thousands of tiny figures walk toward different destinations. Some walk steadily. Some stop and start. And some, the ones we have been watching, are walking in circles. Not because they do not know the way, but because arriving means being seen. And being seen means being measured. And being measured might reveal that the label was wrong all along. This is the trap of self-handicapping, and it is worth naming it clearly. You win the explanation, but you lose reality. Every excuse that protects your image costs you an actual outcome. The presentation you could have nailed. The exam you could have aced. The relationship you could have deepened. The excuse keeps the story clean, but the story is fiction. So what breaks the cycle? Step into a workshop, a small, well-lit space with wooden tables and simple tools. The walls are covered in sketches, half-finished prototypes, things that were attempted and revised. This room is the opposite of the self-handicapping mindset. Nothing here is about proving an identity. Everything is about process. The first fracture in the pattern comes from shifting what you attribute success to. Berglas and Jones showed that self-handicapping grows from unearned or unexplained praise. The antidote is radical specificity. Not, I did well because I am smart, but I did well because I spent 3 hours restructuring the argument in Section 2. When you can name exactly what you did, success stops being a mystery you need to protect and becomes a recipe you can repeat. The second fracture comes from redefining what a test actually is. For the self-handicapper, every performance is a referendum on identity. Pass, and you are safe for now. Fail, and you are exposed. But this framing is a distortion. A test is information. It tells you what works and what needs adjustment. It does not tell you who you are. Nothing tells you who you are. That question is a trap in itself. Picture a scale. On one side sits a glowing, perfect sphere labeled image. On the other side sits a rough, unfinished block labeled outcome. The self-handicapper keeps piling weight on the image side, keeping it elevated, pristine. But the outcome side sinks lower with every excuse. The moment you decide to let the sphere crack, to tolerate a flawed image in exchange for a real result, the balance begins to shift. The third fracture is perhaps the most counterintuitive. It involves allowing yourself to try fully and fail visibly. No safety net, no excuse preloaded, no late night before the morning meeting, just effort, exposed. This is terrifying for someone whose identity has been built on the idea of effortless ability. But it is also the only way to learn something the self-handicapper has never been allowed to learn. That failure, real failure, without a cushion, is survivable. If this pattern has lived in you for years, know that it started as protection. It was not a character flaw. It was a rational response to an irrational situation, being praised for things you could not control or explain. The fact that you can now see it means you have already begun to step outside it. The woman from the beginning of our story eventually gives her presentation. She is exhausted. She stumbles in 2 places. The slides are not as polished as they could have been. But for the first time, there is no excuse waiting in the wings. No story about the phone or the lost sleep designed to soften the verdict. Just her work, imperfect and exposed under the conference room lights. She does not know it yet, but this is the most intelligent thing she has ever done. Because for the first time, whatever happens next will be real.